Allahabad, and Dr. Satnayan is from the Andhra near Vijayawada. We are going to start the session. I'll request Dr. Satnayan to announce the first speaker.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's first session on free paper on cataract. Now I call upon the presenting author, Dr. Rahul Bahekar, on femtosecond laser cataract surgery, our initial experience with one or eyes.
Yeah, sure. Yes.
Hello. Hello.
Please restrict the time. Please take care of the time.
6 minutes.
Very good morning to the respected panel of judges, chairperson, and my dear colleagues. My topic of today's presentation is femtosecond laser-assisted cataract surgery, our initial experience with 109 eyes. I have no financial interest. Femtosecond laser are ultra-fast pulses in the range of 10 to the power minus 15th of the second. Wavelength is 1030 nanometer. Femtosecond lasers have been FDA approved for the cataract surgery since 2010. Femtosecond laser works on the principle of photodisruption, where this laser pulses leads to the formation of plasma wave, which leads to the bubble formation and cavitation, which coils with each other, leads to the evaporation of tissues and tissue separation. This is how we do femtosecond laser. First, eye is docked with patient interface. Then this come on a screen. Then primary incision is get adjusted position. Then secondary incision get adjusted. The CCC is being centered. Then this anti-segment OCT comes on side screen. Parameters are checked and selected, and the laser the corneal length is adjusted, and the laser is being fired. First CCC is being done. Then nuclear fragmentation, and finally primary incision and two secondary incisions are being done. Then these incisions are being opened with spatula, and capsulotomy is taken out, and the nuclear fragments being separated in the pattern where the laser is being done, and they are get emulsified as normal. Materials and method. It is a retrospective study consists of 109 eyes which undergone the femtosecond laser assisted cataract surgery. Each case undergoes an anterior-capsulotomy, lens fragmentation, and corneal incision with femtosecond laser, post-femto laser phacoemulsification, and iris implantation. Preoperative evaluation done regarding the visual acuity, slit lamp examination, intraocular pressure by applanation tonometry, fundus evaluation, corneal topography, keratometry, A-scan, specular microscopy, blood pressure, blood glucose, and physician consultation. Intraoperative parameters recorded regarding the docking centration and CCC size. Primary and secondary incision width, length, and meridional locations are being noted. Then arcade cuts, if given, then angle, position, depth, and diameter are being noted. Lysis pattern, whether chalk, cylinder, or combined, being noted. Then femtosecond treatment time and CD for torsional phacoemulsification being noted. In post-operative follow-up, post-op base corrected distance visual acuity was recorded on day 1, 3, 7, and 20. Our results are, our study includes 109 eyes, out of which 62 are right eye, 47 are left eye. Of 101 patient, 65 are male and 36 are female. Age ranges from 42 to 83 years, mean age is 65.15 years. Nuclear sclerosis pattern was nuclear sclerosis greater than or less than or equal to 2 in the 34 eyes and greater than or equal to 3 in the 75 eyes. Primary incision width varies from 2.7 mm to 2.9 mm. It is 2.7 mm in 24 eyes, 2.8 mm in 83 eyes, and 2.9 mm in 2 eyes. Average primary incision length is 1553.43 micrometer and secondary incision width is 1.1 mm. arcuate curves given in 23% eyes, that is 25 out of 109 eyes. CCC size varies from 4.2 mm to the 5.5 mm. It is 5.2 mm in the 95 eyes. Nuclear fragmentation pattern was only chop being done in 46 eyes, only cylinder in 6 eyes, combined chop and cylinder done in 55 eyes, and no chop, no cylinder done 2 eyes. 93 eyes are implanted with the monofocal IOL, 15 with multifocal IOL, and 1 eye received a toric IOL. Surgical induced astigmatism calculated from 22 eyes without arcuate curves was 0.4 diopter for right eye and 0.32 diopter for left eye. Among the 92 eyes which completed 1 month follow-up, the final base corrected distance visual acuity was equal to or better than 6.9 in 76% eyes and 6.12 in 21.7% eyes and less than 6.12 in 2.17% eyes. Complication: 1 eye had incomplete CCC, 3 had inadequate lens fragmentation, and 3 had incomplete corneal incision. Our observations are short but definite learning curve for the post-femtophaco for opening incision as they are multiplanar, completing CCC, hydro procedure as there is air bubbles which get entrapped between the nuclear fragments, and PC if we have to do the hydro gently, otherwise there is chances of posterior capsule tear. In separating fabricant, we have to separate the fragments in the plane where the laser is being done. And in cortex was, as there is clean cut cortex, no cortical fibers are there, it is first difficult to wash. Then no major intraoperative complications during the post-femtophaco, excellent predictable visual outcomes. When we go through the literature, we found that in femtosecond laser, water tightness of corneal wound is better, predictable CCC size and circularity, better anterior-posterior IOL positioning, reduction in phaconergy, and reduction in phaco time. To conclude, our initial experience with 109 eyes was uneventful and impressive, short but definite learning curve, no significant sight-threatening complications, and excellent visual outcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much. The next paper is the Jammu Pupil Dilating Devices. Chief and presenting author is Dr. Suven Bhattacharjee from Kolkata.
Respected Chairman, sir, judges, and colleagues. The next gen pupil dilating device can be inserted and removed through a 0.9 incision, which no device has been able to achieve. And I am Suven Bhattacharjee from Kolkata. I have no financial interest in the device mentioned. Pupil expansion rings dilate the pupil, prevent meiosis, and restrain from iris from collapsing. Older rings had a limitation in shallow chambers and smaller pupils, but the Mulligan ring was found to be highly effective in IFIS and was easier and faster to use than other retractors and rings. But does it meet all our present-day needs? Now, Mulligan ring requires at least a 2.2 incision and cannot be used in bimanual or coaxial MICS, though these procedures suppress iris prolapse and IFIS. A 2.2 mm corneal incision for 25 gauge, 23 gauge, or even 20 gauge small pupil vitrectomy is self-defeating. A smaller incision would be desirable. In shallow anterior chambers, a thinner profile ring would be definitely desirable. A ring which can be inserted through a smaller incision would be preferred in femto small pupil phaco because the femto treatment is done in a non-sterile zone after the insertion of the Mulligan ring. So that would reduce the rate of infection, definitely. The purpose of this paper was to evaluate new pupil dilating devices for the smallest incision required, efficacy in dilating the pupil, and safety. Ethical committee approval was obtained and informed consent was obtained. The pupil size was measured from the slit lamp scale. Less than 5 mm pupils were included. Less than 6 mm pupils were also included when there was a history of tamsulosin intake or IFIS in the other eye. Preoperatively, pupil size and endothelial counts were done. Postoperatively, on day 1 and 7, pigment dispersion, pupil shape, sphincter tears, and iris atrophy was recorded. And on day 30, endothelial counts were also recorded. The Bhattacharjee ring. It's made of 5-0 nylon, 0.1 mm thick, single plane, flexible, resilient, slim joint. The hexagon is equally thin and flexible. It is easily inserted through a 2.2 incision. The notches straighten as they pass through a 0.9 incision. And these notch alternate flanges are tucked either unimanually using a 23 gauge forceps alone or bimanually using a 23 gauge forceps and a iris hook. This is bimanual MICS in progress. The next is coaxial with a wound assisted IOL insertion in a square device. And here the lens is in the bag. We measure the pupil size and the rexus size. This is a hard cataract coaxial 2.2 phaco with a hexagon pupil size and rexus size measured. 2 notches are disengaged and the ring is simply pulled out of a side port or a main incision, and the ring remains intact, and we have a round pupil at the end of the surgery. After we are happy with the insertion through the 2.2 incision in the first 10 eyes, we moved over to 1.5 for the next 10, and then finally 0.9 for all the rest of the 13 eyes. We used a smaller ring when the corneal diameter was less than 10 millimeters. Incisions were enlarged for 2 to 2.2 for phaco and IOL. Insertion, removal, stability, and complications were noted. The pupil and capsular rexus size was measured. The ring was removed through the phaco incision in 28 eyes and through the side port in 5 eyes. IFIS was graded as per the Chang's scale. This is the master table, but I will, due to paucity of time, I will be presenting only the important findings. 33 eyes, 17 squares, 16 hexagons. Average pupil pre-op 4.1, enlarged to 5.7, and the rexus size was 4.9. There was no snagging of the incision, no obstruction of the instruments. Device was stable, and floppiness was restricted by the anterior flanges. We had iris sphincter tears in 2 eyes, but because it was very small pupils and rigid pupils, we had a small iridodialysis and hyphema in 1 eye, but that was iatrogenic, cannot be attributed to the device. We had a round pupil in 31 eyes, no significant endothelial cellular pigment dispersion or iris atrophy. This is a square device being used post-op day 7, round pupil. Hexagon device, post-op 7th day, perfectly round pupil. And this was very rewarding. Other eye blind due to angle closure glaucoma. This eye peripheral eye can be done 20 years. Anterior chamber depth 1.72 millimeters. We used a hexagon, no endothelial touch throughout the service. A nice round pupil at the 7th day with unaided 6/9 vision. So in conclusion, Bhattacharya rings can be inserted and removed through the 0.9 incisions, can effectively and safely dilate the pupil. The hexagon is preferred in smaller eyes. It can be used for standard as well as MICS phaco, small pupil vitrectomy, shallow anterior chambers, and femto small pupil phaco. An injector is not yet available, though it's not absolutely necessary. Now, the Mulligan ring being made of polypropylene floats in BSS, and it could hit the endothelium when the ring disengages and only BSS is present in the anterior chamber. The Bhattacharya ring will not float. Because of its thickness, the ring is precluded from use in shallow anterior chambers. The scrolls act like torsion springs and compression springs, and they could crush or release the pupil margin unpredictably. The scrolls also can catch the incision or the inserter and lead to quite a messy situation at times. Mechanical devices like Mulligan ring incur additional surgical time and expense. The Bhattacharya rings are not only easier to use, they have a simple single plane design which allows them to be made by plastic molding or stamping, and you can make a truly continuous ring with no joints. That would lead to translate to faster production, reduced costs, less financial burden. Thank you for your kind attention. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Bhattacharya, for that statement.
Thank you, sir.
So the next paper is on OCT structural comparison of incision made with late cut versus laser sharpened 2.2 millimeters keratomes. Presenting author Dr. Satyajit Sinha from Patna.
Respected Chair, August gathering. In this age of cataract surgery, while we are talking about IOLs, I thought it was very important that we take care of the small things that also we are using in our cataract surgery. And in this study, we are doing a OCT structural comparison of incisions made with lathe cut versus laser sharpened keratomes. I have no financial interest in any of the products mentioned here. Before I start, I want to give a brief description that these blades that we use, the keratomes, some companies which make, they are sharpened by laser, and they are imported, and the ones we have here are lathe cut keratomes. Corneal incisions have a lower learning curve and give early visual rehabilitation. Much is being talked about the precision with which femtosecond lasers can make reproducible corneal incision, as in for cataract surgery and or for limbal relaxing incisions. The fact remains that it will be a while before femto laser becomes affordable by all, if at all that time will come. That leaves us with the option of making incisions manually. Several studies have shown that diamond keratomes make one of the most stable and smooth incisions. Again, diamond keratomes are not affordable by all. Now, there are several factors which are affecting the wound. It's not only the keratome which is going in. we are making multiple entries by dialers, and phaco probe itself can hurt the wound. The phaco probe heat which is there, entry of cystotome to make rhexis, entry of the lens injector at the wound entry point, and the IOL itself. But we will restrict this study to the point number 1, sharpness of the blade with which we make the primary incision. It's sharp and smooth. It's the sharp and smooth edges which enter the cornea are either sharpened by lathe cut or laser sharpened. Metal blades are efficient and affordable, but its sharpness plays a major role in defining the final iatrogenic astigmatism. In our study, 2.2 mm white keratomes were used. Anterior segment OCT is a non-contact method used to study the corneal architecture, which includes all the layers that we are aware of. We wanted to study the position, length, breadth, and smooth edges of the clear corneal incision, define the amount of iatrogenic astigmatism. We wanted to know the architectural integrity of the wound and if there was a difference in the iatrogenic astigmatism in corneal incisions made by lathe cut versus laser sharpened. This retrospective chart review study involving 45 patients were undertaken at a single center from June to November 12. Proper consent was taken before the study was undertaken, and all surgeries were done at topical clear corneal phacoemulsification with 2.2 keratomes. We compared the structural and anatomical smoothness in 23 patients who underwent clear corneal incisions with lathe cut against 22 patients who had clear corneal incisions with laser sharpened. Post-operative astigmatism was noted at the end of 1 week and 1 month. Minimal cholion hydration was done and surgical SIA was kept in mind. Corneal adapter module was used to capture images of the corneal incisions, and one blade was only used for one case. All incisions were made at 180 degrees and the length of the incision was between 1.6 to 1.8 millimeter. Cases with systemic diseases were excluded and who had other corneal comorbidities. Out of the 23 patients in whom lathe cut blades were used, 19 patients had ragged edges, wherein 22 patients in whom laser sharpened keratomes were used, OCT revealed ragged edges in only 3 patients. So this was very important for us. We took a picture, here we are showing the picture of the OCT that the incision was made by lathe cut keratome on day 1 and at day 7. This is another picture of the same lathe cut incision, in which you can see also that the endothelium is ragged over there. Epithelial defect was negligible after day 1 of the surgery, and endothelium gaping was seen more in lathe cut metal blades than in laser sharpened blades. OCT images revealed much smoother edges of the incision made by laser sharpened than those made by keratomes. Now in this picture you can see the incisions which were made by laser sharpened on day 1 and then on day 7 of how smooth they are, including all the layers of the cornea. This is another picture. This is another picture which is made by laser sharpened keratome, incision of the laser sharpened keratome. The first week post-operative astigmatism ranged from 0.75 to 1.5 diopters, and at the end of 4 weeks it was 0.5 to 1 diopter in incision made by lathe cut. Whereas in those which were made by laser sharpened, the astigmatism was very negligible. OCT revealed far smoother external, intrastomal and internal edges where incisions were made by laser sharpened OCT. Structural integrity of laser sharpened clear corneal was better at the end of 4 weeks as compared to those made by lathe cut keratomes. In group 1, the patients had a higher degree of residual astigmatism. Though in future femtosecond incisions may become order of the day, the use of diamond blades may become more affordable, but for now, laser sharpened blades appear to be more efficient and cost effective in comparison to readily available lathe cut metal blades. Thank you for your patient hearing.
Thank you. That was a good presentation. Next.
The correction of the residual hematopia and astigmatism, which sulcus fixated piggy-banked IOLs.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone.
Presenting author Mr. Ashok Vyas from the SCAR board. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to talk about the correction of residual hematopia using a piggy-bank lens. I'm a consultant to the Rayner intraocular lenses. There are various ways one can correct the residual hematopia, those being using glasses, contact lens, LASIK, piggyback lens, or a lens exchange surgery. I'm going to talk about the piggyback lens part of it. The radar Sokoff lens shown here is one of the first lenses designed to work as a piggyback lens in the sulcus. It's a 13.5 millimeter long with 6.5 millimeter optic. There's a reverse angulation of 10 degree to conform with the forward convexity of the primary lens implant. It's a hydrophilic injectable lens through 2.2 or 2.5 millimeter incision. The power ranges from -5 to +5 diopters with a 0.5 diopter increment, and there is also a toric as well as multifocal variant available. You can order this lens online using the Raytrace software and enter all the details, and you will get the lens tailor-made to your patient. The incision of lens is very easy. It's on the topical anesthesia. You open the previous wound, make space in the sulcus with a viscoelastic, implant the lens through the injector provided with it. It's a very large lens, so my tip would be that try to avoid the trapped optic or haptic while you are loading the lens in the loading area. These are some of the cases which we implanted initially. The primary lens was Technis or C-Flex in some of these patients, and you can see the postoperative residual spherical equivalent, which was then corrected with corresponding piggyback lens, and the final visual outcome at 2 years, as shown as an uncorrected visual outcome, is quite satisfactory. 20/15, 20/20, 20/10 in these 3 patients, and the other 3 patients, as you can see here, also had a very good visual outcome. So in other words, this lens works very well in correcting the residual emmetropia, and in this example you can see the piggyback lens sitting over the primary C-Flex lens. And here you can see very clearly the space between the primary and the piggyback lens. Interestingly, the space is clear throughout, which means there is no direct contact between these 2 lenses. We also implanted this lens is a toric variant in a couple of patients, and as you can see here, the result is still quite good. 2015 in the first patient and 2014 the second patient, uncorrected visual outcome. And this was the last patient in which there was a PC tear, and then there was a large wound which led to wound-induced astigmatism, which was then corrected with the piggyback lens of a toric variant. And interestingly, this lens remained very stable even at 4 years, as you can see here, at 1 month and at 4 years example. So there are various advantages of this lens over the LASIK, in my opinion. The first one being it's a reversible procedure. You can take it out if there is any problem. Theoretically, the reflection would remain stable for the long term compared to the LASIK. Also, the complication rate would be very minimal. And you can correct higher emmetropia using the piggyback lens as compared to the LASIK variant. And also, you've got the possibility of using a multifocal variant, which can also improve the near vision in these patients. When you compare this procedure over the lens exchange, we all know that there is a very high complication rate with the lens exchange surgery, and as far as possible should be avoided. And also, the piggyback lens can be implanted any time after the first surgery, while the lens exchange needs to be done as soon as possible to reduce the complication rate during the operation. In conclusion, I would say that the Raynaud Sokoff lens offers safe, easy, and accurate way of correcting residual emmetropia and astigmatism. It's a customized lens design for a pseudophakic lens implant. The refractive outcome was very excellent in our series, and you got the option of toric and multifocal variant as well. Thank you very much.
Now, I call upon Dr. Jahnavi Vinod Mehta, study of modular transfer function and Stell ratio on height rays of aspheric and spheric ioids.
Good morning. Good morning, respected judges. Good morning, respected judges, seniors, and my fellow colleagues. Today I am about to present a paper on the study of modular transfer function and Stell's ratio on ray tracing technology of aspheric and spheric IOLs. Before I proceed, I would like to emphasize on what we are dealing with. So let us look at the magnificent Taj Mahal through the eyes of an uncorrected myope. We cannot appreciate her much, do we? On correcting the myope, we have a pretty clear picture. Now how do we take it a step further and make the patient look like this? Now this is improving the quality of vision. This is what my study deals with today. covering a few basic topics. What is contrast? The difference between bright and dark in an object is called contrast. Modulation is a series of contrast, that is light and dark objects placed in succession. It can be calculated by the difference between the maximum and minimum intensity divided by the sum of it. Modular transfer function curve represents a series of modular transfer values for different patterns of stripes plotted on a graph. As we see here, contrast is inversely proportional to the spatial frequency in cycles per degree, that is CPD, which can be plotted on a graph known as the modular transfer curve. Coming to the second part, Stirls ratio, which is a measure of quality of optical image formation. It is the ratio of the peak image intensity of a point source of lens, which is shown by the red graph, to the maximum attainable intensity of an ideal optical system, limited only by diffraction, shown by the black graph. So in current practice, spherical and aspheric designs of IOL are the options in a monofocal variety. Aspheric designs are incorporated with calculated amount of aberration to counterbalance your spherical aberration of the cornea. To calculate these optical characteristics, we can objectively evaluate by the Stirls ratio and MTF. Thus, the aim of my study was to compare MTF and Stirls ratio of the aspheric and spheric IOLs. It is a secondary data analysis done at Lakshmi Eye Institute, Panvel, on 45 eyes. Patients implanted with aspheric and spheric IOL in capsular bag post photoemulsification surgery were included. Any post-surgical complications, patients with toric or multifocal IOL, decentered IOLs, or any ocular pathology were excluded. We used the eye tracing ray tracing technology on pseudophakic dilated IOLs, 21 days plus or minus 7 days post-op patients. MTF in different spatial frequencies and different pupil sizes were taken. Coming to the demographics, in a population of 30 males and 15 females, the mean age was 57.1 and 61.7 respectively. The MTF at 2.2 mm pupil size showed that there was not much of a significant difference between aspheric and spheric IOLs. But as we increased the pupil size, we saw that there was a marginal difference between the aspheric and spheric IOL, aspheric showing a better result. When we saw the total optics at 25 CPD, the MTF is better in aspheric group, but not significant statistically. When we compare at 2.2 pupil size, when we compare the 25 CPD for internal optics in total eye, we see there is not much of a difference. But on increasing the pupil size to 4 mm, there is a reduction in the MTF, but aspheric shows a better result. Coming to the Stirls ratio, in the aspheric group, the Stirls ratio was higher for both the 2.2 mm pupil size and 4 mm pupil size, though the difference between the two groups was not statistically significant. Thus, discussing this, the MTF of internal optics for aspheric and spheric IOL have come almost similar in my study, and aspheric IOL doesn't show a good MTF because of pre-existing spherical aberration intended to counterbalance your corneal positive spherical aberration. But when you combine this with the corneal MTF, it provides a better MTF, thus a better image quality at 4 mm pupil size, though the difference between aspheric and spheric IOL is not statistically significant. And it shows a marginally better Stirls ratio than the spherical IOL, though not statistically significant. Concluding my topic, aspheric IOLs show a better MTF in total eye than internal optics. Spherical IOLs show a steeper change in MTF at dilated state. Aspheric IOLs show better Stirls ratio than spheric IOL in total optics. And there was no statistically significant difference in MTF and Stirls ratio in aspheric and spheric IOLs. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you very much. Now may I request the audience that they can ask the questions on the previous papers. The first paper was of Dr. Rahul Baker, the second was Dr. Bhattacharjee from Calcutta, and third was Dr. Satjit Sinha from Patna, and fourth was Dr. Ashok Vyas. If audience, anybody is interested to ask question from the speaker, can ask one question each. Thank you.
Where do you get these rings, Shobhata?
Yeah, these rings are manufactured by me confidentially. It takes me about 1 hour to manufacture under a microscope, baking in an oven and gluing. And I forward them to Madhu Instruments, and it's being packaged and sterilized by them under an NDA. But it's manufactured by me confidentially.
They are available.
No, they're not available. They're not available commercially, and they're only available as an evaluation device. And so far, I'm the only person who's used it. I've used it in 54 eyes, and we'll be forwarding it for further trials.
They are not available commercially.
Not yet, sir. Not yet.
But you showed something about Madhu Surgical?
Yes, it's being packaged, sterilized and packaged by them as an evaluation device, not as a commercial device.
Have you taken a patent on it?
Yes. I have an international search report and written opinion already available from the European patent. That's my priority date is 27th February 2013.
And any other question?
Yes.
This is to the. Do you not evaluate
Thank
6 millimeter pupil size?
Yes, sir. Yes.
No, 6 millimeter.
So actually our sample size was quite less and we couldn't get a 6 millimeter dilated pupil size. We had very few, around 6 patients. So that could be the scope of the study.
I have a question regarding the femtosecond paper.
Yes.
Yeah. You have mentioned about post-femto rexis size. You have measured.
Yeah.
How have you measured?
Sir, it is already pre-procedure. It is fed up in the machine, and we already know what size it is: 2.8 mm, 2.9 or 2.7.
But what you are actually getting, I am talking of the rexis size. The rexis size that you are actually getting, are you measuring that?
Sir, I am not measuring post-op. It is already pre-op fed in the
Yeah, that I
2.8.
know.
So we are assuming that it is.
So he is doing keynote address. Huh?
Yes.
Very good.
I'm always amazed how the Indian ophthalmology in the last 25 years, how higher standards. At one time I remember we used to take the projector one room to the other and not allow. But I'll mention a couple of things I wanted to take it to heart about research because almost 1/3 of my time I spend in research. And the basic research, how we can change to the truly betterment on the top of the world of ophthalmology in this country, that is our potential. Not when you're concentrating on femtosecond. If you have a minute, we'll do that. You know?
Dr. Raja, I'm thankful to you that you have come to introduce him and giving some advices to us. Thank you so much.
Thank you. By giving advice, you learn a great deal. Advice is both ways. You think that I'm giving an advice, I learn a great deal over the years, and this is then. In our own culture, it was mentioned again and again. Dr. Bhaskar Roy Chaudhary, right? Bhaskar Roy Chaudhary did his MBBS in 1989 from Calcutta, Department of Ophthalmology 1992 from JNMC Aligarh MS 1994, gold medalist from RIO Calcutta. He did his fellowship in cornea and anti-segment in 1996 from LB Prasad Institute and was the best fellow awardee. Cornea Service 1996-2005, Head of Cornea Service 2003-2005, Eye Care Research Center, Calcutta, and been working as Head Suryodaya Eye Center, the Calcutta Medical Center Research Center. Interest in premium IOLs, astigmatic correction, corneal grafting, impression cytology, limbal stem disease, Steven-Johnson syndrome, and other ocular surface reconstruction. He has publications in several international journals and is a reviewer for the WHO Bulletin and has been in thesis guide period. He has a patent for the toric marker and their copyright for the software delivery, and by him, that's wonderful. Software for analyzing IOL positioning the eye. V-Drive, a knowledge management solution and I code for ICD ID coding. Whenever you have such a long introduction, prove it to us.
I didn't know
Thank
I
you.
had such a long introduction.
No, just kidding.
Thank you, sir.
Take it seriously. Sometimes I say some things. Don't take it too seriously. We all have to prove it to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Raju.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Raju, for the kind words. Well, time has undergone a full circle because 1 year ago, Dr. Raju was over there. I was presenting and he gave me the best paper award. So, I will be presenting to you a new slit lamp based method for corneal marking for toric IOL implantation, which is not so new, it's 1 year old now. The work was done at 2 centers, one in Kolkata and Mumbai, and I have taken out a patent for the instrument that will be shown. Now we all know that accurate corneal axis marking is an important first step in toric IOL surgery to correct astigmatism. And this is because with every degree of misalignment, you lose 3.3% of the effect. And with 30 degree of misalignment, all the effect of toricity is lost, after which you start adding to the patient's astigmatism. And the higher the toric correction you are attempting, the higher are the stakes, because for a 6 diopter toric, a 5 degree misalignment will mean a 1 diopter of post-op residual astigmatism. So typically, as of now, 2 marks are required. The first is the reference mark, which is on the 0-180 degree meridian, which you see in the red. And the second is the placement axis. The second mark is required on table if your axis of placement is not 0-180, as you see in this case. The currently used marking systems are the gimbal marker, which was the first marker, which you see on, this is the gimbal marker. This was followed by the Nguyen bubble marker, which is basically a spirit level kind of a marker, and the current one is the ASICO marker, which is the electronic marker. This is the most popular and advertised one now. Now there are 2 issues in marking. One is to ensure that your axis is correct, which means that what you are calling 0-180 is indeed 0-180, and the second is ensuring that the marks bisect the cornea through the optical center. You see below is the gimbal marker, and you see that these marks are reference to the lateral canthus, and they are in no way neither are they horizontal nor are they passing through the corneal center. This has been somewhat attempted by the Goider marker, which uses a pendulum device to ensure the horizontality, but it still does not ensure corneal bisection. Now, why is corneal bisection so important in toric marking? This is because you have a parallax error. Suppose you had a marks like this and your toric axis is over here. So this is not clearly not passing through the center of the cornea, and therefore you cannot align the lens properly with the marks, because you have to align the lens with a invisible imaginary line like this. Whereas if the marks were through the center, they would align with the marks on the IOL perfectly. So the description of the technique, our observation was that when you move a slit lamp beam, sweep it across the cornea, as it cuts the first Purkinje image, it brightens up, and that is the end point where the slit beam is actually bisecting the cornea. So watch in this video. As you sweep it across, this is the end point. This is where the cornea has been bisected through its optical center. It's a simple technique. It's an instrument that you are using every day. All of us know about it. All of us have seen this, but I'm just documenting it for you. And this works even in oblique axis. So the next issue is, how do I know that when I'm putting the slit lamp axis say at 40 degree, how do I know that it is exactly 40 degree? So for that we have devised a very simple instrument which has a dial and a pendulum device which writes the dial. So every time, whichever angle you place it, the 0-180 will always come to the gravity defined 0-180. And you can turn the slit beam to graduate the exact axis of the beam. So it's a simple 2-step technique in which the slit lamp's illuminating column is made coaxial with the viewing column. The slit beam is narrowed to a thin slit and aligned with the desired angle on the calibrator. Then you take off the calibrator and you put the patient's head and mark it freehand. Some people are also using 26G markers to make the marks, 26G needles to make the mark more accurate. So we did a comparative series of 60 consecutive eyes. The first 30 had corneal marking using the bubble marker. The second 30 had corneal marking using the new technique. This is 1 year old data. We have done many more cases with the new marker after this. All had standard manual keratometry and SIPT formula was used. The online toric IOL calculator was used. Incision location was juggled to get the least residual astigmatism. And we corrected astigmatism in the range of 1.5 to 4 diopters in both groups. We used a specially designed software to actually measure the axis of marking and the axis of placement of the IOL. Now what we got was, in the two groups, the mean deviation from the intended axis of placement and actually obtained axis of placement was significantly different for the second group with the new marker at P less than 0.05. So none of the markers available in the market actually address the problem of centering the mark on the cornea. Even the current electronic markers or the ones that are coupled to the microscope, they do not correct the problem of centering it. And we felt that it was very important because otherwise it would result in parallax errors which would make intraoperative positioning very difficult. So we have a simple tool which does not have a lot of gadgets, and no marker to this date, even 1 year after my presentation, has both the features. So this is the only logical way of avoiding parallax errors on table. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bhaskar Chaudhary, for the excellent presentation. Thank you very much.
May I ask a question?
Please.
The Varian introduced by Alcon, right? You must be aware.
Yes.
How do you compare? What are they doing? Actually, half of what you are saying I don't understand. I would like to understand. I want to learn. Yeah.
Varion is a software-based thing in which during optical biometry they are capturing image of the eye. They are using limbal landmarks which are then transferred to the microscope software, and the limbal landmarks are identified over there, and from there the projection occurs based on those three identified limbal landmarks. Now the problem is the limbus is not a circular structure. It's an irregular oval. So finding the center of the limbus is never accurate. And ideally we would like our IOLs to be centered on the optical axis, not on the visual axis, not on the optical axis. But there is no way of identifying the visual axis on table, especially if you have given a perivulvar block. So,
but most of the cases there with Varian type of surgeons, we never give a perivulvar block. So without perivulvar, it works pretty well.
It works well, but the decentration of the ring has to be centered manually. Because with three limbal landmarks, you cannot really find out the optical axis of the cornea. The only way of finding out the optical axis of the cornea is an optical method, not a physical method.
So I would like to add on this. They just don't. It's not just the limbus, but they also consider the blood vessels also. So it's not the blood vessel, also the iris-pattern and the limbus. So based on all the three, they do the marking.
Excellent. That's an excellent point. Not limbus. Thank you for reminding us that. When you reach the stage of toric IOL, I think you should give up the perivulvar blocks and things like that.
That has already been given up.
When you reach that stage, there's no scope for things like perivulvar block and the patient is holding the patient. No, just kidding. No, that was wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Anybody?
Thank you, Dr. Raju, for making this. Now, is there Dr. C.G. Vanilla? Okay. So then the paper is the Sulcoflex IOLs for residual refractive error after cataract surgery. This was the best paper from the Tamil Nadu Ophthalmic Association, Professor C.P. Gupta Award for the best paper. And it's a very interesting topic, the alternate dilemma of the iris fixated intraocular lenses versus the scleral fixated intraocular lenses.
From Joseph A. Hospital, Trichy. We have no financial disclosures. Posterior chamber IOLs are the ideal choice, but when you have inadequate capsular support we have alternate methods of IOL fixations. Anterior chamber IOLs, scleral fixated IOLs, and iris fixation IOLs were the choices. The anterior chamber IOLs were the most commonly used alternative IOLs, but because of the corneal complications of bullous keratopathy, the use have been limited now. And now we use the scleral fixated IOLs and iris fixation IOLs. Our aim was to study the safety and efficacy of the posterior fixated iris fixation IOLs and to compare them with the scleral fixated IOLs. Our study design was a comparative, non-randomized intervention case series. And we included patients who underwent either say scleral fixated IOL or the posterior iris fixation IOL between September 2011 and April 2012 at Joseph I. Hospital, Trichy. And the parameters included were the indications of the surgery, surgical time, and any complications noted post-op. And we excluded eyes with any retinal glaucomatous pathology or any coexisting comorbidities. These were the IOLs used and their properties. The methods we used were we make paracentesis wound 90 degree to the main port on either sides of the tunnel. We make a 5.5 millimeter tunnel to the scleral tunnel as we do in small incision cataract surgery. We inject pilocarpine to constrict the pupil and then inject viscoelastic. Now we introduce the iris claw lens into the anterior chamber as just like the ACIOL and then dial it horizontally using a dialer. And then we use a lens holding forceps and take the IOL back into the behind the iris. After the lens go behind the iris, then holding with the lens holding forceps, the Simke hook is going through the paracentesis bone and the claw is just tapped and the claw gets enclaved onto the iris. The same thing is repeated on the other side and the viscoelastic is washed and side ports hydrated. The scleral fixated IOL, we follow a railroad technique. We make two tunnels on either side, 2 millimeters away from the tunnel. The straight needle is guided to the 26 gauge needle and then the suture is brought out through the main tunnel and the sutures are cut. And these cut suture ends are knotted to the holes of the haptics of the scleral fixated lens. This is done on the either side. After adjusting the suture, we introduce the scleral fixated IOL into the eye and then we anchor it to the sclera, one with the straight needle on one side and bury the knot after cutting it under the scleral pocket. The same thing is repeated on the other side using the curved needle. Then the viscoelastic is washed away from the anterior chamber. Whatever vitreous is there, we just cut and then form the AC with saline. These are the postoperative appearance. We can see that iris enclave lens, you can see the indentation at the 3 o'clock and 9 o'clock position. And even after the dilatation of the pupil, the IOL remains stable. And those on my right shows the scleral fixated IOLs. We studied 14 eyes, of which 8 were males and 6 females in the posterior iris fixated lens, and 32 eyes of the scleral fixated IOL groups of 18 males and 14 females. The most common indication was a complicated cataract surgery, and next comes the subluxated or zonular dialysis eyes. The best corrected visual acuity we achieved 12 of 14 eyes in the posterior iris fixation IOL, and in scleral fixated 28 of 32 eyes gained better than 6/18 vision. We had any complications similar to what we get at the any SACS surgeries. Corneal edema, uveitis, and IOP rise was the most common complication encountered. The mean operating time was 20 plus or minus 8.9 minutes in posterior iris fixation IOL and 49.7 plus or minus 18.9 minutes in the scleral fixated IOL group. The best corrected visual acuity in both our groups was similar. It was 85.7% in posterior iris fixation IOL and 87.5% in scleral fixated IOL. The uveitis most commonly encountered in the posterior iris fixation IOL and was not statistically significant. The intraocular pressure rise was more in the scleral fixated IOL group, and the surgical time was very less compared to the scleral fixated IOL, and this was statistically significant. We compared our study with those of the other studies where they have done alternative IOLs for the correcting aphakia, and the visual acuity was similar to that of the other studies. The IOP rise was little more in our study, and uveitis was higher in the posterior iris fixation lenses, and we didn't have any dislocation or tilt with iris fixation lens, and we had 8.5% in the scleral fixated IOL group. To conclude, the retropupillary fixation of the iris claw lens has a low risk of postoperative increase in IOP as compared with the scleral fixated lens. It's a time-saving method, has a short learning curve, and it's a safe and effective alternative for aphakic eyes without sufficient capsular support. But larger series and longer follow-up are required to determine these conclusions. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody wants to ask a question?
There is a small question. See, it is a known fact that anything that is touching the iris, or in your study you have said the uveitis is more in iris fixated IOL.
Yes.
It is also known to cause CME, cystoid macular edema. So how is that visual acuity is better in your iris fixated IOLs? See, have you done any study regarding the CME, whether OCT or FFA in these cases?
So we didn't have any CMEs in our, but we followed only for 6 months time, and we didn't have CME in our series. So I'm...
Yeah, please.
So we have been doing this procedure since 89. And what you're talking about CME in these cases, because it's a retrofixated lens, if you see the endothelial surface of the cornea, it is the same surface which covers the posterior surface of the iris. If you see the anatomy, the posterior surface of the iris is least irritant in the human body, human eye. So the amount of CME which you are thinking with this procedure is practically negligible, because you are touching the posterior surface and not the anterior surface. There is a difference between anterior surface of the iris and the posterior surface. Both of them are different. So the posterior surface is least irritant. Chances of uveitis which she is talking is probably because of the remaining of viscoelastic inside. It's not the iris claw lens, but it's the, if you leave little bit amount of viscoelastic behind, you will have some amount of uveitis. The posterior surface of the iris is least irritant, and it hardly causes any uveitis. I have done more than 400 cases, and we have trained about 200 surgeons for the same procedure. So this is an excellent procedure.
What is your experience of the corneal edema after the surgery in these cases?
Surgical manipulation is yes, but these eyes are never normal. These eyes are always abnormal. They are always compromised eyes. So you don't expect something phenomenal. But this is the best alternative than what the scleral fixation, because it's little difficult to do it. This is the simplest way of doing it.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The next paper is on Sulcoflex IOLs for residual refractive errors after cataract surgery. Presenting author Dr. Purendra Basin.
Thank you, Chairpersons. I will be speaking on Sulcoflex IOL for residual refractive error after cataract surgery. We don't have any financial interest on the products which we have used here. The purpose is to report our clinical experience of using Sulcoflex, piggyback, or add-on IOLs, what I say, for correcting residual refractive error in pseudophakic eyes. It's a prospective interventional case series done at our center by a single surgeon. We had included 10 eyes of 10 patients, and mean age was 56.1 years and mean follow-up was 9.1 month, and with a maximum of 14 months. And the mean preoperative anterior chamber depth was measured, which was 4.47 millimeter, and complete slit lamp examination for uveitis, anterior posterior synecdoche, presence of PI, intraocular pressure was measured, and IOL location, position, type, material, and presence of the posterior capsule stratus, everything was noted, and fundus examination was evaluated. We excluded cases with shallow anterior chamber of less than 3 millimeter, active with the active inflammatory disorders, and corneal endothelial cell count less than 1500, and unstable back fixated previous IOL with the inability to dilate pupil, with inability to adhere, secure sulcus placement, and presence of angle closure glaucoma were excluded, and cases of microphthalmos. And for multifocal IOL, we all know cases with macular pathology and other problems. The results were in mean refractive error in diopters measured was 5.575, and preoperatively, and it reduced to 0.1 in mean spherical error, and the mean cylinder was reduced to 1.02 in the post-op period. And the best corrected visual acuity in Logmar was 0.243 preoperatively, and it is reduced to 0.17. It has improved, and mean uncorrected visual acuity has substantially improved in post-operative period of 0.19 in Logmar. And the specular count was noted, which was not much of difference in preoperative and post-operative period. This is a small video, and it's a case of multifocal IL, which we have done in a case of 32 years old girl, which had restored multifocal IL in previous IL. This was a monofocal IL was implanted elsewhere, and 3 months later she developed PCO, and the IL, the part was completely jammed in the capsular bag. This is a refractive multifocal IL, which you can see. This is a specially designed lens with the undulating haptic, and as has been, this has got a 6.5 millimeter optic size, and overall diameter is also larger. It's 14 millimeter. The lens sits very nicely, and the surgery time is less, and surgery is very simple. And this is a post-operative pentacam picture, as you can see here. This is the lens, which is convex anteriorly and concave posteriorly. This is the pre-existing lens. These are the two the images here you can see, and this is a slit lamp photograph. This is the Sulcoflex lens and the pre-existing lens. Various options are available to correct the residual refractive error, like IL exchange, corneal refractive surgery, and we can do add-on piggyback ILs and with a regular biconvex or Sulcoflex IL. The demerits of IL exchange is it's a traumatic surgery, and we best performed in early post-operative course before the IL gets adhered to the capsular bag. The demerits of corneal refractive surgery is that we require expensive excimer laser, and one has to wait for minimum 3 months, and normal corneal morphology shape is must. With the routine biconvex piggyback lenses, the potential problem is the interlenticular haze, as you can see in this picture, which has been taken from literature, and there is a hyperopic defocus present at the point where the two lenses meet each other. And this Sulcoflex lens design has got an undulating haptic, large optic diameter, round optic edge, which reduces photopsia, and the optic configuration is anterior convex and posterior concave, undulating haptic, and it's a aspheric IL with a made up of hydrophilic acrylic material. And to conclude, Sulcoflex add-on ILs appear to be safe and effective technique for correction of residual refractive error and reducing the spectacle dependence after the cataract surgery. The IOL is well tolerated in all eyes, and post-operatively they don't have any picture. The eye becomes quiet at 1 month post-operative period. These are the two references which we could find, which has been produced in the studies which has been shown, and they are also of the same number. And by now we have done almost 19 eyes, and all of them are very good. I thank you for your patience.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, sir.
This is like a piggyback lens.
Yes, sir.
This is not multifocal.
It is available in variants like aspheric IL, monofocal, and toric, and multifocal also.
As a Sulcoflex lens.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yeah.
And Dr. Basin, what are the powers which you are using?
We can correct up to 10 diopters of the residual refractive error up to that.
Plus minus both?
Plus minus both.
Since people are on and off leaving, I just want to mention one thing. Cataract blindness, diabetic blindness in this country is going to be, the diabetic blindness is going to be 8 times, 10 times, maybe 12 times worse than cataract blindness in this country. It's already happening. If you look at it overall, the entire country. Yes. So, always think you are exceptional, brilliant guys and young people, what they do. But think about at least 1/3 of the time spent in such a way thinking, so how can we truly reduce the blindness incidence in this country, not just the cataract and the high-powered stuff. Most of the residents in the United States, when they come here, when they see, they'll be stunned, the quality of work we are doing here. But most of the diabetic blindness are all going to happen in productive age, between 35 and 58 or 60. Most of the cataract blindness is all elderly groups. Am I making some sense? Just think in your background. Cataract blindness and the diabetic blindness is going to be 8 to 12 times worse than cataract blindness in India and most of the developing countries.
because the two countries the diabetes is rising are India and China. Obesity increasing. And the private, let me mention if you don't mind, the public schools and private schools in Delhi, the private school children, private school children, 1 in 5 are obese or overweight in Delhi. Private school children. It's going to happen unless we really intervene. There's going to be a disaster, the diabetes and related blindness in this country, because India is a highly developed country with the developing country problems. Our children's problems are one step below Sudan. Don't need to feel bad about it. Think in your backyard because you are outstanding and brilliant.
I have a question for you. What is the minimum amount of refractive error you have corrected? And as you said, your upper margin is around 10 diopters. Can you do it for if you have an astigmatism, or is it only for the spherical component?
No, we can correct. Toric variant is also available. So if the astigmatism is more like 2.5,
so what was your criteria for taking how much amount of refractive error did you consider for correction?
Maximum which we can do.
No. What did you take as your minimum limit? That is what I wanted to know.
Minimum limit is, I have taken maximum limit only, about 2.5 diopters. This girl which I am showing the video, she had a 2.5 plus 2.5 diopter residual refractive error, and she had a multifocal IOL in the other eye. So we have corrected both in this. And the predictability is very good.
I just wanted to know whether is it beneficial when you do for less than 2 diopters. That is what is.
I have not. I don't have any experience. Maybe Dr. Ashok has got experience for it.
It's a very good question. Yes, you can put it in as low as half a diopter also, but you have to weigh the risk and benefit
That's
ratio
right.
here.
That's
A
right.
surgical procedure with a 1 in 1,000 risk of endophthalmitis and a small risk of CMO. So you have to weigh that risk against the benefit and the demand of the patient, a young patient with and what the demand are. You can put as low as half a diopter. And as Dr. Bhasin said, that you can put 0 spherical plus 1.5 cylinder toric variant as well.
Okay,
Thank you very much. Let's move on to the next paper.
May I call upon Chaitali Patel to present her paper on comparison of rate of PCO after cataract surgery with and without CTR implantation.
I'm Dr. Pallavi Agarwal, Chief and Presenting Author of this paper, and I had around 2 months back given a notification that I'll be presenting this paper. Yeah? Okay, good morning everyone. I, Dr. Pallavi Agarwal, am here to present my study on the rate of posterior capsular opacification with or without CTR implantation. Authors have no financial interest in any of the material presented. Even with all the advances in the technique of cataract surgery, various designs and material of IOL introduced, posterior capsular opacification still remains a territory unconquered. The only effective treatment known as YAG capsulotomy, which has its own risks and complications. Many novel methods have been proposed with little success. We all know that CTR is a device used to stabilize the capsular bag in cases of zonular weakness. We started off the implantation of CTR ring in high myopes, which was a routine, when we thought of undertaking this simple study. So our aim of the study is to compare the rate of posterior capsular opacification with or without CTR implantation. We included all patients between 45 to 80 years of age. We excluded patients with complications and mature, hypermature cataract, zonular dialysis, pseudoexfoliation or anterior segment abnormalities. We had 120 eyes of 120 patients, which we divided into 2 groups, Group A and Group B, 60 eyes each. In Group A, we implanted the IOL with CTR ring. In Group B, only IOL was implanted in the bag, uneventful phacoemulsification. Now, each group was divided in 20 patients each into 3 further subgroups one group we implanted PMMA non-foldable lens. In the second, we implanted acrylic hydrophilic lens. And in the third, hydrophobic lenses. The results, overall percentage obtained at the end of 1.5 years shows that in group A, which had CTR with IOL, the overall percentage at the end of 1.5 years of PCO was 6.67%, whereas in no CTR ring group it was 16%, overall including all the 3 IOLs. Now going to the subgroup level, we see that the maximum decrease that we see in the amount of PCO is in the hydrophilic group. In group B, it was 6 patients at the end of 1 year and 2 patients in the group of CTR implantation at the end of 1 year. The result was practically the same at the end of 1.5 years, although we had 1 patient of hydrophobic lens in group A with no CTR ring implantation developing PCO. Going on to discussion, we noted a significant decrease in the rate of PCO in all types of IOL. In group A, that is with CTR implantation, maximum decrease was noted in the group of acrylic hydrophilic lenses. It was proved in vitro studies in various publications mentioned that the tangential bend caused by the capsular tension ring stops the migration of anterior epithelial cells and hence it decreases the rate of PCO. Another theory put forward is that aqueous itself has some factors which reduces the amount of PCO, and CTR helps in that in a way that it separates the anterior capsule and the posterior capsule, thus a better circulation of aqueous is postulated. To conclude, CTR does decrease the rate of PCO formation in all variety of IOLs, although a larger sample is required to come to a definitive conclusion. It's a simple study with effective result, which can easily be tried out at individual or institutional level. Thank you for your patient hearing.
Which would be more expensive, doing ag laser capsulotomy or putting a ring in every patient? Which will be more cost effective?
See, the cost of CTR ring that we are implanting is PMMA CTR, not with the Guido's injector, so it costs 700 rupees more. So I don't think that it will be very costly to
How much do you use on an average ag laser capsulotomy?
Sorry, sir?
How much you charge?
Capsulotomy, right? You do capsulotomy and a patient, still overall when you do a very good cataract surgery today,
yeah,
capsular opacities are still
1800 rupees is the cost in private cases.
Yeah, but the numbers needed to treat are much higher. You'll have to put a CTR in every patient anticipating PCO.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Definitely.
It would make more sense to put it only in people who are at high risk for a ER caps.
That is
like
already been done. Like in high myopes, it has already been. It's a routine nowadays. I mean, in my institute. But we saw that the rate of PCO was
a routine nowadays. Maybe in your institute.
In our institute, yes.
And have you analyzed statistically p-value?
Yes, it was analyzed, though this doesn't mention this, but we had a significant reduction.
Again, I have used it in few cases, thinking this some 8-10 years back.
Okay.
But I found it to be useful because in high myopes we still developed PCO.
With the CTR implantation.
Even with the CTR at that time.
There is a study which is going on. We are in collaboration with Dr. Uthoff of Kiel, Germany, who is also doing the same study on this, although he is implanting with the injector, the Guido's injector. So he is also collaborating with us on this point, and we have come up with significant result, although it has not been tabulated.
Are you using larger CTRs for myopes?
We are using Morcher number 14.
And you observed with the hydrophilic lenses less PCO.
Hydrophilic lenses, because hydrophilic lenses are the most notorious for PCO.
So Dr. just for science sake, the CTR that is there, it has a round edge all along, 360 degree. If it would be made into a square edge CTR, Would that reduce the incidence of PCO more?
Definitely, it is going to help further, and we are in the process of making this square edge CTR ring.
But we went through the square edge research for 20 years ago though, right? Intraocular implant, how many papers were there? I don't know, I have to recollect again. We went through square edge, preventing, I don't think it did work. People have paper after paper presented at one time. I don't know. If you want to really bring, it's wonderful how you do it. I'm hats off, the quality of research, but you have to really go back and look at everything and give us really correct information. As a research paper, this may be okay, but if you say ring will prevent posterior capsular opacity, how many cataract surgeries we are doing in this country? 3 million? 4 million? We put a ring in everyone. Whereas how many capsulotomies we do, what percentage of capsulotomies will come in a straightforward cataract surgery you've done?
With the new tacky intraocular hydrophobic lenses, they're very less, very low.
So, as a research paper, maybe it's a wonderful thing. Hard work, you learned a great deal without any question. But when you think of it, 4 million people, we were putting ring in everybody to prevent the posterior capsular opacity. Whereas it occurs only less than 3%, 4%, 5%.
In India, we are not implanting hydrophobic lenses in all the patients because patients here are not that affording. So the major chunk of the patients, if you look in India, they are going for hydrophilic or PMMA lenses.
Hydrophobic is not routinely done in even the United States today. It's not question affordability, no. Very few people, they are all studying.
Design is more important.
One suggestion, see, at the end of this, whatever the implant is implanted, there is a simple way of avoiding the posterior capsule opacification in the future. That is by vacuum cleaning the anterior capsule, the undersurface of the anterior capsule. You see a crystal clear anterior capsule even after 6 months. So instead of implanting a CD or an extra device into the eye, which has a risk of even intraoperative complication, the causative factor is the anterior capsular epithelium. So a method which can remove the anterior capsular epithelium will permanently reduce the
Sir, we cannot remove with anterior capsular polishing all the cells which are present in the equator.
No, Dr. Bhasin, no, Dr. Raju, have anybody studied that PCR ring in cases of the congenital, early cataracts in children? Is there a difference between the PCO with ring?
We do PCCC in all these cases. So
yeah, that's right. But in case you are not doing, then I'm saying.
The other thing is we reach a stage where a posterior capsular opacity, even though it's small, it's not a high number. Suppose 50% of the people are getting posterior capsular opacity, something like these kind of studies are very valuable. But still, overall capsular opacities are minimal, right? Overall, the numbers. And it can be managed very effectively. If there is no YAG laser today, these things will be wonderful because needle capsulotomy can be dangerous, vitreous, So the availability of YAG laser, how safe it is, and number of capsular opacities, So, all right, you learn everything, but it doesn't, today's knowledge and things, that may not be that, valuable addition to us. Yeah.
Dr. Pallavi, I think Dr. Mishra's idea is very good. You can do a comparative study between adults and children also.
Yeah. We have implanted, although the Morcha number 14 is a larger ring. So in children we need a smaller ring, or we need to.
You can do CCC in one group.
Exactly. Yes.
So let's move on to the next paper.
Very good.
Thank you. So the next paper is on study to analyze and optimize the MICS for different cataracts with micro-incision IOL implantation. Dr. Arun Kumar, he is from Chennai.
Good morning, everyone. The author and the co-authors have no any financial interest to disclose.
So the purpose of the study, as the incisions and phacoemulsification are becoming smaller, the 1.8 and the 2.2 microcoaxial phaco surgeries are becoming more common nowadays. So we wanted to analyze the passive and the active and the passive wound sizes along with the incision stretch factor involved in these surgeries, and to optimize the required micro-incision size in order to implant the micro-incision IOLs. So we had, in this study, we had 30 patients who are divided into 2 groups. All the patients underwent temporal clear corneal phacoemulsification. We had divided these patients into 2 groups where all the patients underwent bilateral phacoemulsification,
In the left eye of the patient, even if they are undergone a 1.8 or a 2.2 microincision coaxial phacoincision surgery, the wound was not extended for the IOL implantation. The wound was implanted in a partial wound assisted manner. But on the right eye of the patients, after the surgery, cataract removal, the wound was increased in size by 0.2 millimeter for the IOL implantation in 1.8 and 2.2 microcoaxial phaco surgeries. So here, what we had also been used in the surgery is a trapezoidal blade, which at the inner edge would be 1.8 and the outer edge would be 1.9 to 2 millimeter with the length of 2 millimeter. And we also calculated the length or the incision sizes using the gauges. Similarly, in a 2.2, the trapezoidal incision is made where the outer edge is slightly more than the inner edge. Coming to the phacoemulsification surgery, here in a 1.8 mm microcoaxial phacoemulsification surgery, you can see that the incision, the trapezoidal incision, offers a good maneuverability during the phacoemulsification surgery, and it makes the surgery more easy with the access of the cataract wherever it is there in the nuclear material, whereas there in the eye, and the maneuverability you can see here is quite movable. You can do it quite easily, and after the surgery you can see that the wound is actually extended to 1.9 millimeter. So here in a 2.2 millimeter surgery, similarly the trapezoidal incision provides a good and an easy surgery. And here again, when you check for the incision width, it has increased. For what it was 2.2, now you can see that the 2.4 gauge actually enters the wound. So coming to the IOL implantation, here, as I told you, here on the right eyes of all the patients, the wound was extended by 0.2 millimeter and the IOL was implanted. So here you can see that in these kinds of where you extend the wound, you don't need to hydrate the wound at the end of the surgery. The wounds actually seal quite well without any hydration. But in this eye, you can, in a 1.8, where the wound, the IOL was implanted in a wound assisted technique without extension of the IOL, without the extension of the incision, you can see that the wound most of the times need to be hydrated, stromally hydrated to seal them. But actually you can also see that the wounds had actually increased in size after the wound assisted implantation of the IOL. What we had also done is a computational fluid dynamic analysis, and we had compared this not only for 1.8, 2.2 but also for 2.8 mm incisions. What we had noticed here in 1.8 and 2.2 microcoaxial incisions, the streamlined flow particles were more towards the endothelial cells, so the turbulence in the anterior chamber was less in both these kinds of surgery. This is a 2.2. But in a 2.8 mm surgery, the streamlined flow particle flow is more to the corneal endothelium, and the turbulence in the anterior chamber was actually more than the 1.8 and 2.2 mm incision surgery. And the computational fluid dynamic turbulence analysis in the anterior chamber fluid, you can see that the pressure was the least in the 2.2 mm surgery and was the highest in the 2.8 millimeter microcoaxial phacoemulsification surgery. And the same computational fluid dynamic analysis, pressure contour analysis in the anterior chamber shows the pressure was the least in 2.2, and the pressure was highest in the 1.8. We also did an OCT analysis of the wounds after the surgery at 24 hours, the regular where the wounds were extended and in the wound assisted manner. The incision, the images of the eyes where the wound was not was extended showed a better closure when compared to the ones where the wounds were the IOL was implanted in a partial wound assisted technique. And the results of the anterior chamber OCT shows that in the eyes where the IOLs were implanted with the wound assisted technique, the closure was the wound assisted OCT observance was closure was less compared to the where the wound was extended. It was but at the end of 4 weeks it almost becomes the same. But you can see that the initial 1 week the difference is quite significant. So to conclude, Post-micro IOL implantation in a wound-assisted manner stretches the micro-incision cataract incisions nearly by 0.1 to 0.2 millimeter as compared to the insertion of the cartridge strip into the arcuate corneal vat, which stretches only by 0.05 millimeter. The anterior chamber OCT indicate an excellent wound closure providing greater degree of incisional stability of the hypersquare corneal valves created with the pre-calibrated microplates, and the computational fluid dynamic analysis of microphaco incisions provides safer anterior chamber fluidics when compared to a regular 2.8 mm incision, and also observed to be safer in all aspects, in the aspects of positive pressure, irrigation, aspiration, fluid velocity and turbulence. These are the credits for the study, and these are some of the references for the study. Thank you.
Thank you very much.